Hi everyone, I'm Professor Lisa Butler from the University of Adelaide and I'm a prostate cancer researcher, and this year I had the pleasure of helping to design the translational program of the ANZUP ASM. So it's very exciting for me now to speak to two of the speakers from our international faculty who presented in the translational highlights this morning. So we have Emily Grist and Roger Lee. So welcome to Australia and welcome to the meeting.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invite. No problem at all. I know you've come a very long way and I really appreciate that. And it's a big thing to do, to come all this way and then suddenly give all these talks. But, certainly something we really appreciate. So something that really, I think, struck me about both of your presentations this morning was you were talking about translational team science type projects. And I think that's something we're really trying to promote here at ANZUP, the involvement of particularly young clinician scientists in translational research, sort of taking things from the bench to the bedside and back. And I think this is something you guys have really done very well. And I just wondered, I think our audience would be really interested in just some of the key ingredients that you think are important for the success of these sorts of partnerships. So I wondered if you might, each give an example of what you think makes these sorts of teams and collaborative research networks work. So maybe, Emily, if we could start with you.
Yeah, so I've worked on the translation research program for the STAMP-EVE trial. I think a couple of things that have worked really well is the being completely multidisciplinary. So we have clinicians, clinician scientists, statisticians, bioinformaticians, skilled scientists at a variety of career levels. And everyone speaks a slightly different language, but just trying to understand each other's world and backgrounds and strengths brings a lot to a project. And I think really clear mentorship from experienced people. I've certainly been really well mentored by numerous people, Professor Attaz, Professor James, Professor Sweeney, and particularly when we think about promoting women in science. During this project, I had 2 children. I've been put forward for a huge number of things. I think that's really important when you think about that transition from early career scientist to developing your own research interests within a huge project.
Yeah. And yourself, Roger?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think seeking out mentorship early on is very important. The definition of collaboration is that you don't necessarily understand a lot of the things that your expert mentors may be experts in, and you're seeking out help. So I think as a young investigator, it's easy to kind of be comfortable in your own shoes and just continue to do what you're doing. But at the same time, if you want to establish some of these collaborations, you almost have to put yourself out there a little bit to explore something that is quite unknown to you. And that may feel uncomfortable in the beginning, but it's hugely rewarding once you see the fruits of your labor and to see the collaboration really work well.
Oh, that's good. And so in terms of how you started, was this something that you sought out, or was it something that you was actually sort of suggested and encouraged you by mentor?
Yeah, a little bit of both, I think. So certainly for my trial, the investigator-initiated trial that I was fortunate enough to run, I had the clinical know-how to run the trial and to ask the questions in the clinical realm, but to approach it from the scientific perspective, that was, a lot of it depended on my mentors to help guide the way, to teach me how to, collect the samples, to think ahead of time which of the time points are important. So without their help, it would have been completely impossible.
Yeah. How about yourself, Emily? Was this something that, you had thought about before you embarked on it?
Yeah, so I'd worked with my mentor before I even started a PhD. And we had a good working relationship. So I think that really helped the science flourish from there on. We sort of knew how each other would think. I think one thing that maybe people don't realize is how long these things take. So I first started this project in 2016, and now we're starting to produce that impactful research. And when you're working with translational research, it takes time. You just have to stay on the bus, stay on the project before you start seeing these results, and have to have that patience and resilience to keep going with a project.
Yeah.
And I think that affects the way these things are funded. When you've got funding streams of 3 years, that can be a problem for these big team science projects.
Absolutely. And I think that was something that was really good that came out of your talk, was the fact that sometimes just obtaining samples can take years and years, and it's just so much effort and continued kind of efforts to get a hold of these things. And that's something I think a lot of bench scientists are not that familiar with. And so sometimes I think that can be, a bit of a hurdle to understanding each other and how these sorts of projects progress.
Yeah, because it's maybe not the glamorous side of the research. You see these great results, but I think people need to understand you've really got to get your hands dirty, bringing these samples in and doing the sort of less glamorous side of the job, which is like calling pathology sites, getting people motivated. And that's how you think science projects work.
Well, that's right. And I mean, while you say it doesn't sound glamorous, but I think to us, as basic scientists, we wouldn't be able to do these things without that effort. And so I think sometimes that, when I have clinician students that come through my lab, for example, they sometimes worry that they're not doing enough of the very skilled technical work. Some do, some don't. But I think they sometimes don't always realize that those sorts of efforts where their medical background is really, really valuable can actually make the difference between a project happening or completely failing, really, because you can't get samples, or that, they needed to have the right conversation with the right person or bring that medical perspective to things. So I think that's kind of a really important message to get out there as well, is that's very useful contribution as well.
Low pressure sample, patients donating their tissue, the things patients go through in trials to enable us to do this research is such an important part of what we do. So that persistence in sample collection, building relationships within a healthcare infrastructure, I think are fundamental.
Absolutely.
And I think also planning ahead of time. You think about, especially for multi-institutional studies where you bring so many different investigators into the mix, and so many different institutions have to even just get the sample transfer agreements. You talked about generating 130.
There's too many contracts. They get in the way.
Yes.
There's delay our science. I think that's extremely frustrating in different institutes differently. And
That's right.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're necessary legally, but as a scientist and clinician,
But at the same time, you wonder whether, the bureaucratic side of things can be cut down a little to make it a little easier.
Yes, absolutely. If the more things could be electronic or something like that. But yes, this back and forth does seem to be very inefficient between the individual kind of entities in a team. It's bizarre, isn't it?
but maybe if you designed a trial in future, you would mandate that tissue to come in at the point of recruitment, whereas we were retrospectively collecting, and as we developed Stampede 2, we've learned a huge amount from Stampede 1 in that regard.
Well, that was actually leads in perfectly to my next question, actually, which was, you talked about, the paths that you each took to come into clinical research. But, looking back, is there anything you would do differently, in the benefit of hindsight?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think, just kind of taking more of a comprehensive approach. Certainly there are time points that I wish I would have collected a little bit more urine samples, or having another attempt at collecting another blood sample to just have a more comprehensive sample set so that we can better understand the science behind things. But at the same time, I think you also understand how to make do with the sample set that you have collected, and try to answer the question as best as you can, given the limitations.
So yeah, you can't control everything, can you? It's very different in that way. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, so pre-specify sample collection, then a trial framework. But I think we did the best we could when you think that this trial Stampede started in 2005. Yeah, very different landscape, both in terms of treatments, but also our technical assays and things like that. And another thing, so for Stampede 2, we do ask for tissue upfront, but another interesting aspect, which is slightly less related to the samples themselves, in 2005, we didn't collect ethnicity data for Stampede participants, which I think is really important now as we think about translational research, is understanding are our results applicable to a wide variety of patient populations. So for Stampede 2 now, we are collecting baseline ethnicity data, but our findings from Stampede 1, much harder to determine that. So we're using data linkage to NHS records, but I think that's been a regret for most investigators in Stampede that we don't have that data now.
Yeah, and it does seem to be a shift in mindset over the last sort of decade or so, right? That there's now really an emphasis on making sure we're collecting those biospecimens. There can be research coming from the trials that then
I think
feeds back into and that sort of it certainly wasn't the case, quite a few years back where people were really struggling or fighting to make sure specimens were being collected and stored and all of that kind of thing. Now it's kind of more second nature, which is really good to see, I think. I guess just to finish up, we have a lot of young clinicians that come to these ANZUP meetings and might be interested in sort of starting to get involved in translational research, and some of them may or may not have higher degrees. I guess it'd be good to hear sort of, the impact that it's had on not only your career, but perhaps maybe even your clinical practice as well, having an active involvement in research.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think just a more comprehensive understanding of the biology that drives cancer progression and also drives, responsiveness to treatment, that really kind of forces you to think more in the broader terms on what type of treatments that we can, potentially bring to our patients and how to sequence these treatments. Even though a lot of the guidelines, as you know, are not really data driven, but maybe based off of these biological insights, you're able to make some, educated guesses so that you can test these again in the investigational trials to bring those, really towards the guidelines.
Yeah, I think it's about understanding your role. I think in UK clinician scientists, there's less of us. No, has been tricky, particularly post-pandemic. Our career pathway it can be challenging at times, but I think I was once given some advice that you can't try to be the best full-time clinician in the world and the best full-time science in the world. Your job as a clinician scientist straddles both worlds. Yes, and that is a real asset to be able to understand the data, ask pertinent questions, and bridge that gap. So I think we need to start respecting that is a role in itself. It's important. It should be funded, and we should be mentoring the next generation through that pathway before there are clinician scientists anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a really great point to finish off on. And thank you both so much for having a quick chat with me here in the conversation. And thank you again for coming to ANZUP, and we hope we'll see you here many times in the future. Thanks for having us.
It's our pleasure.